Hi, everyone. I'm Abigail. This is Bella, and welcome to another Two Kids Interviews. Today, we are joined by author Beth McMullen. Some of Ms. McMullen's books include The Secret of the Storm series, the Lola Benko Treasure Hunter series, and Miss Smith's Spy School for Girls trilogy. Ms. McMullen has also hosts the awesome podcast Writers with Wrinkles. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. This is super exciting. I'm usually sitting where you guys are doing the interviewing, so it's fun for me to be on this side.
When thinking about spy stories, there are a lot of men. James Bond, Ethan Hunt, Jason Bourne, Nick Fury. There are not enough women. Did that inspire your stories?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. So when my kids were little, actually my son, who's now in college, so this was a while ago, when he was reading a lot of books, and the first thing that I noticed when I was reading with him was that all the spy heroes were boys, and the girls were sometimes, the sidekick or a secondary character or somebody who wasn't really getting to drive the action, wasn't the star of the show. So I really wanted to see if I could turn that upside down. And that's what I did with Mrs. Smith's Spy School for Girls. I took the girl and I made her the main character, and I took a boy and I made him the sidekick, in addition to some of her other friends who were also girls. But I liked doing that to just kind of see what was going to happen. And what happened was it was an enormous amount of fun. And I wrote 3 of those because I was having such a good time. And it was really gratifying for me to have a book where the girl was the main spy character.
What is your favorite spy movie?
Oh, that's so hard. Oh my goodness. I love James Bond. Always have since I was a little kid. And I love Jason Bourne. There was a book called, oh my gosh, Shining Through. This was a book from the 1990s that they made into a movie. And it's a spy story set in World War II, where the spy is a woman, and she doesn't start out as a spy. She becomes one over the course of the book. And I love, 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 love that one.
Is it true that Secrets of the Storm series was originally supposed to be called the Cats and Dragons series? Not dogs.
That's what I know. Dogs would have been fun. Throw some dogs in there. That's what I called it before it had a title. And it just, in my head to this day, I still call it Cats and Dragons, because when I was writing it, that was the title on the manuscript. And it was about cats and dragons. So of course the publisher was, no, we need a better title for it. That's kind of, boring and not that interesting. So they came up with Secret of the Storm. But in my head, it has always been Cats and Dragons. And I think I referred to it that way in some interviews and on some website stuff. So I think it's funny that you guys caught that out there somewhere, because that's not the official title, but that was my title for it.
Honestly, I think that Cats and Dragons sounds better, but The Secret of the Storm does have a little bit more of a pizzazz into it.
You're right. And that's a lot of times when you're writing books, the title is decided by the marketing department. And those are the people who are deciding how they're going to sell this book to the world. And they have ideas. And when they say, we don't want to call it Cats and Dragons, we want to call it Secret of the Storm. When you're the author like me, you say, okay, this is your wheelhouse. You know more than I do. Great. But in my heart, I still call it Cats and Dragons.
You have a cat that looks just like Toothless from How to Train Your Dragon. Any chance we can see?
I don't know where I can go look for her. If you guys want to hold on for a second, do you have time, or are we going to run out? Hold on for a second. I'll see if I can find her. Here she is. This is Stormy. Say hi, Stormy. I just woke her up from a nap. She's a big, fat, grumpy old cat. But he looks exactly like Toothless. And that's what gave me the idea for Secret of the Storm. I never would have had that idea without this cat who likes to hang out with me in the morning when I have breakfast. And this is what I like to do. I don't know if she's going to let me do it, but I like to squish her head so that she looks like that. And then she looks like Toothless. right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was doing that to her, squishing her head, pushing her ears back. And all of a sudden I had that moment where I was like, oh, this is toothless. Wouldn't it be crazy if this cat was actually a dragon? I'd be in trouble because she's grumpy and she burned down my whole house. But I thought that was such a funny idea for a book. And it just kind of stuck in my head and I couldn't get rid of it. And that's when I knew I had to like write it just to get it out of my head. Yes.
Like in Spy School for Girls, you went to boarding school. When you read a book set in boarding school, can you tell if the author went to boarding school themselves?
That is a very good question. And the answer is yes. So I feel like some writers do it really, really well, and I can't tell. Those are the ones who have done their research because you don't have to have gone to boarding school in order to write about it, but you do have to do enough research that the reader can't tell that you didn't have that experience yourself. So when I notice is when somebody hasn't done enough research and they get things wrong. So when I lived in New York City for a long time, and one of the things that I really hated seeing in TV and in movies is if they would have a train leaving from Grand Central Station going somewhere in Florida, say, because trains never go from Grand Central to Florida. That kind of detail, if you get that wrong, the reader or the viewer or whoever will know that you didn't do your homework. So if you're going to write about something that you've not experienced yourself, you have to do enough homework that the reader doesn't know. So because I had the boarding school experiences, I can tell when somebody just hasn't figured out how to write about it in a way that's really authentic.
What is your process when putting a book together? Do you decide the end before the middle, or do you put it together in order?
You know, I usually write the beginning and I write the end. And then I try to fill in the middle. So I know how it's going to start and I know how it's going to end, but I don't know what happens in the middle. And the middle is the hardest part. I bet all the authors that you've ever interviewed, they all say the same thing. The middle is hard. So I have to figure out how to get from point A to point B, all that stuff in the middle. And a lot of times I end up having to change the ending or change the beginning because they don't fit anymore. So I don't work in sequence. It's not like chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, etc. It's like chapter 1, chapter 30, chapter 25. And then sometimes I have all the chapters and I move them around, because I'm like, wait, this sequence doesn't work. I got to put this over there. I got to put that over there. It makes things complicated, but that's just the way that I do it. I wish I could do it in order. I think that would be easier.
I'm making a comic series called Dino Spies.
What? That sounds fun.
It's actually starring Sherlock Holmes, the source, but I thought Dino Spies sounded better than Dino Detectives.
Yeah,
So,
I like Dino Spies. It has a nice ring to it.
so I wrote the beginning, end, and then I filled out the part in the middle that would lead to the end.
That's good. That's really good. Did you have an idea in your head about how it was going to end before you started writing?
Well, we knew it would end with, uh-oh, a cliffhanger. And Sherlock Holmes' the source is hanging off a cliff, a building. And we knew that there would be a train scene, a big train scene at the end. And that's all we knew about the end.
That's good though. Then you can start to see how you figure out the pieces as you go along. It's kind of a big puzzle, right?
Writing isn't easy, and rejection seems to be a part of most writers' stories. Can you tell us about that part of your journey?
Yes, it is absolutely a part of every writer's experience. If you're writing for a public audience, if you're just writing for yourself, no one's ever going to reject you. But if you want to have outside readers, you are sometimes going to have to get rejected. It's just part of life and the writing profession. But what my experience was with it when I wrote my first book, and it wasn't a kid's book, it was a spy thriller, but it was for grown-up readers. And I thought it was pretty good. I kind of liked it. It was my very first book. And I sent it out to 50 different agents because when you're a writer, you have to have an agent, and your agent is the one who sells your book to the publisher, who prints it and edits it and gets it out to you guys to read. So sent it out to all these agents trying to get an agent. And I got 50 rejections for that book. And I still have all of those rejections in an envelope. And when I go and I talk to aspiring writers, at conferences and festivals and things, I always bring them along and I say, this is what happens. And you just have to accept it. And after you have those rejections, you have a decision to make. You're either going to quit or you're going to try again and take what you learned from that experience to redo your work. So I wrote another book and I sold that one very fast because I took the lessons that I learned from the rejection and I applied them to the next project. So it's part of it, but I'm sure you've heard your teachers and parents say this. It's a learning process. You get something. Every time you fail at something, you learn something. So you're less likely to fail the next time.
We have interviewed a number of authors who've had books banned, which means that many kids won't have access to the same books we do and possibly not see themselves represented in books. Can you give us your thoughts on this?
I feel so sad for the kids who are being deprived of books through bans that go on in communities, in school libraries. It's a very narrow band of people trying to restrict the rights of the vast majority of the people in that community. And as you guys said, you want to be able to see yourself in books. It is super important to be able to see yourself reflected in the pages of a book. And by unilaterally deciding that we're going to block access to these books for reasons that, when you drill down, don't make any sense, is sad. And it reflects badly on the community that they are not willing to expand their thinking or accept that somebody's going to think differently than they are. And they do this, they do this banning and deprive these kids of reading material that's critical for them to grow up and be well-rounded and able to think and able to have empathy for other people's situations. So I'm sad about the whole thing. I try to support organizations that are fighting against it. And although I've never had a book banned myself, I know plenty of people who have, and it's really hard on them.
A few years ago, you did an event for the International Spy Museum. You did that with two of our favorite guests we've had on our show, Stuart Gibbs and James Ponti. What is it like when middle grade spy writers get together?
It's ridiculous. We have a lot of fun together. It feels like we're back in elementary school ourselves because really all the middle grade writers that you like, we're all just like stuck being 12 years old. None of us ever really grew up. And hanging out with James and Stuart is always really funny because you know how funny they are on the page. Their stories are funny. They have a lot of humor, a lot of action in those books. They're just like that in real life. They're funny and they're inviting and kids love to be around them. And the spy museum thing was really cool because I had visited there a few years before we did that event. And they have some amazing stuff there if you ever get to go. It is really interesting. So I was really excited to do that event with them. And I was even more excited to do it with James and Stu because that is always a blast.
What writer has had the most influence on you?
Oh, interesting. I would say, and this is probably, not a very original answer, but I would say Stephen King, who I'm a huge fan of and have been since I was probably a little bit older than you guys, but probably too young to actually be reading him because his books were terrifying back then. They still are, but now that I'm a grown up, I can handle it a little bit better. But the reason that I love him and the reason that I think he's so popular is that he's really good at creating relatable characters. So when you read the book, you feel like you could know this person. This person could be walking down your street. This person could become a friend of yours. And that makes the stuff that happens to those characters feel like it could happen to you. It makes it feel really like a real experience. And I admire his ability to do that, despite the fact that he writes in the horror genre predominantly, because I think people forget that the reason that the books are so horrifying is that they're happening to these characters that you really can relate to and care about. And I definitely feel like I'm trying to do that in my middle grade books where the stuff that's happening to, like, say, Abby and her friends in Mrs. Smith's School for Spies is probably not going to happen to like kids like you guys. But if you can relate to her, then the outrageous stuff that's happening around her feels kind of real. So I admire his ability to do that.
Did you watch The Boogeyman?
Which one is that from him?
Hmm.
I don't think so. I will confess, I don't watch anything scary because I'm such a chicken. I will literally, that cat, I'll be like hiding behind the cat because I don't want to see. I can't watch scary movies, scary TV shows. I'm a little bit of a wimp that way.
I agree. I was terrified.
I don't mind. I'm okay reading them because I can put it down and I can just like take a minute. But watching them, I feel like it's too much.
Yeah. You are a big Easter egg person. What is the key to a good Easter egg?
I I love Easter eggs myself. So I was just talking about Stephen King. He's great at dropping things in that will mean something to somebody who has read all of his books. It won't register with people who are not big fans. And I love being able to give the people who are really vested in your work, who have read all of your books, who keep showing up for you as a writer, title after title. I love giving them a little insight. It's almost like an inside joke where you put something in that references something in a different series, something in a different book. So if you've read them, you get it and you have that little laugh and you feel like you're kind of on the inside. And if you haven't read it, it just doesn't matter to you. It doesn't change the story at all. I love that. I love that as a reader. So I like to do that as a writer for the kids who are reading the books.
What advice do you have for young writers?
Two things. Two things that you can do. The first is to read a ton of books, which I think you guys are obviously already doing. Because if you don't read, it's really hard to write. And if, for example, you want to write a graphic novel or a spy thriller, read those. Figure out what those authors are doing in that genre that you can then do on your work. The second thing is to write. Doesn't have to be good, doesn't have to be shown to anybody, doesn't have to be anything at all other than practice. So the more that you write, just like sports, the better you're going to get. So two things, just reading and writing. And don't worry about your writing being not enough or it's not, you feel like you're trying to do something, you're not quite getting it. Just think of it all as practice. Every minute that you spend doing it is a minute better that you are doing it.
That's big advice. Do you also have a smaller tip, something you do when you are writing that maybe a lot of people don't?
You know what I do? Because if you think about writing a whole book, say 250 pages, that feels like a lot, feels a little bit overwhelming, right? Where you're thinking 250 pages, I don't even have one page. I can't do this. This is like too much. So what I like to do is something that I just call setting micro goals. So something very small and achievable. So today, my goal was to edit one chapter of a manuscript that I'm looking at. So I just went through that one chapter and then I was like, okay, I'm good. I'm done. I hit my goal for today. If you set small goals, like a word count, I'm going to write 200 words today, or I'm going to write 500 words today. It's small enough that you can do it so you don't feel overwhelmed. And if you add up all of these little micro goals, you eventually get the whole. So you will get to the 250 pages. You just won't be too scared to start.
You wrote a few adult books before making the great decision to switch to writing middle grade books. But I heard a very upsetting rumor that your next book may be one for adults again. Is that true?
It is. It is true. My next book is for adults, but I haven't stopped writing kids' books. I have another kids' book in the background that I've also been working on. What I'm trying to do is produce more books per year. So there'll be a kids' book and there'll be an adult book. We'll see if I can pull it off, but that's what I'm trying to do. So I love writing for kids. It's been so much fun. So I don't want to give that up, but I'm also trying to get back into what I had originally started doing when I started writing, which was these adult James Bond type mysteries.
Finally, it's time for Turbo 10.
All
10 rapid
right.
fire questions. Are you ready?
It doesn't matter if I'm ready. I'm doing it. Let's go.
Number one, what is your favorite phrase to use?
Let's go.
That's mine. Number two, what is one subject you'd love to learn more about?
Astronomy, the universe.
Number three, what is your go-to snack food?
Peanuts, salted, roasted.
Number four, what was your favorite book growing up?
The Westing Game.
Number 5. If you could teleport somewhere right now, where would you go?
Sardinia, an island off of Italy.
Number 6. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Invisibility.
Number 7. What was your favorite cartoon as a kid?
I was not allowed to watch TV as a child, but I did watch Tom and Jerry later in life. That would have been my favorite.
Number 8. What is your favorite rainy day activity?
Reading. Just sitting in a corner and reading and nobody interrupting me. That's the key.
Number 9. If you could have any 3 dinner guests, who'd they be?
Albert Einstein, Rosa Parks, and Barack Obama.
And last, number 10. What is the best piece of advice you were ever given?
Don't quit, even when you want to. Talk yourself out of it.
You were awesome. Thank you so much.
So were you guys. This was so fun.
I like spending all this time with us. We can't wait to read
Thank you.